Hello, my name is Angela Checky, and I'm one of the social workers that work in the treatment foster care department. I'll be doing a presentation on impulse control disorders. So before the presentation, I just wanted to list here some questions that you're going to be able to get the answers to throughout the presentation, and I'll reveal the answers at the end. So impulse control disorders are disorders characterized by urges and behaviors that are excessive and or harmful to oneself or others. This usually results in an onset of extreme disruptions and dysfunctions in personal, familial, social, and academic aspects of the individual's life. So these are 5 examples of impulse disorders. All 5 of these here are classified in the DSM-5. And the first one is pathological gambling. So pathological gambling is very dangerous and often financially debilitating and often interfere with the individual's personal and professional life. So the people who are addicted to gambling report losing relationships, jobs, homes, all their savings. Most compulsive gamblers often seek ways to fix their financial problems and end up gambling more, thinking that if they just continue to gamble, they'll win money and they'll be able to just, fix everything that they lost or gain back everything that they lost. And this usually just causes a cycle that leads to an even deeper and sometimes irreversible grave financial loss. The next one is kleptomania. Kleptomania is pathological stealing, but it's just not as simple as, stealing something out of a store because you don't have the money for it. So people with kleptomania, they typically steal items with little or to no value. When a kleptomaniac steals, it's not usually a premeditated act, and the things that he or she steals aren't often anything that they need in the first place. So those stolen items may be discarded, they may give them away to friends, or sometimes they may even secretly return it to wherever they stole it from. So, like all impulse control disorders, kleptomania takes over usually when the person is feeling frustrated, stressed, or anxious. So, the person with kleptomania feels as though the only way to feel better, happier, or even excited is to steal. The next one is trichotillomania. It's a rare impulsive condition that causes an individual to pull out their hair, as you can see right there in the picture. A trichotillomaniac will pull hair out from the scalp, eyelashes, legs, eyebrows, arms, and pubic area. When severe, the results are highly noticeable, and many with the condition wear hats, wigs, or makeup that hides their hair loss. People with this condition say that they'll pull their hair out due to some type of stress or anxiety. But really, it's the after effects of the hair pulling that causes even further stress and anxiety. Just by having to always, be self-conscious about that, it just causes them to be more anxious about it. So many will pull out their hair during regular activities like driving, watching movies, or studying. The next one is pyromania. So pyromania is the act of setting a fire, not out of malice, revenge, or financial gain, but just to relieve the need to set a fire. So it's not any intent to harm, no intent to harm anyone, but to rather witness the start of a fire or to learn about how to control or end it. So the pyromaniac, they'll often feel a sense of anxiety or pressure before committing the behavior and will often feel relieved or joyful immediately after setting and watching the fire burn. And lastly, we have intermittent explosive disorder. And intermittent explosive disorder is the condition that causes a person to lash out in anger, often in a hostile or violent manner. People with this condition have reported causing damage or destruction to property or injury to individuals. Usually, a person with intermittent explosive disorder will feel anxious, stressed, or nervous before an outburst, only to feel embarrassed, shocked, or regretful after lashing out. So, what most of these have in common, the individuals who experience these impulse disorders or have these impulse disorders, usually a commonality of stress or anxiety usually is happening before the behavior set in. So that's just good to remember. You may be able to, if you're around someone long enough, or if you have a client or a friend or anything like that, if they suffer from some type of impulse disorders, if they start to act, anxious, or they're stressed about something, they're likely, getting ready to display the negative outcomes of their behavior. So impulse control disorders, there are common signs and symptoms. So there are behavioral, physical, cognitive, and psychosocial signs and symptoms for different types of impulse control disorders. The symptoms usually associated with impulse control disorders represent individuals' inability to control an impulse and will vary depending upon the specific type of impulse control disorder that it is and that the individual is struggling with. The symptoms associated with these disorders tend to get worse over time, no matter which type of impulse control disorder it is. So, behavioral signs are starting fires, like the pyromania, sudden explosive anger or acts of violence, hair pulling, like the trichotillomania, participating in risky sexual behaviors, stealing, like the kleptomaniac, compulsive lying, poor social skills, isolating oneself from friends and family. Physical signs are burn marks on those who engage in fire starting behaviors, presence of sexually transmitted diseases from engaging in risky sexual behavior, patches of missing hair, physical injuries or scars from engaging in physical fights or aggressive episodes, and unplanned pregnancy. Cognitive signs and symptoms are inability to control impulses, unable to remain patient, obsessive thought patterns, compulsive thought patterns. Psychosocial signs are irritability, feeling unable to control actions, fear of abandonment, lowered feelings of self worth, episodes of emotional detachment, agitation, depression, and anxiety. Okay, so impulsiveness in individuals with an intellectual disability. Impulsiveness in people with intellectual disability is higher than typically developing people because cognitive development is associated with behavioral inhibition. So there's just a direct relationship between impulsive behaviors and intellectual development. Individuals with ID have trouble connecting cause and effect, which causes problems with impulse control. So an example that I just like to use is, a child that, sees cookies coming out of an oven. They're hot, they see them coming out of the oven, and immediately they want to grab one, not even thinking that the cookie's hot, they're going to get burned. They want to grab one immediately as soon as they see them. So if this is not controlled, the impulse will lead to a nasty burn. So experience is usually a great teacher for children or individuals with ID. More so with children. I wouldn't actually say individuals with ID. It's actually not as easily learned by people with ID, but they usually will be able to form a connection with the hot cookie being the cause and the, burn that they receive being the effect. So a child will usually learn to control the impulse to grab the cookie right out of the oven. It just may not easily come by with people with an intellectual disability. So this poor impulse control, it typically leads to many unpleasant consequences. Another related problem is poor frustration tolerance. So when an impulse is inhibited, it requires the ability to tolerate a bit of frustration. This ability is called frustration tolerance. It's a very important developmental skill. It allows people to comfortably endure the small frustrations of everyday life. So this in turn serves to limit the unpleasant consequences associated with impulsive behavior. So just going back to the example with the cookie, it will be frustrating to stop the impulse to grab the cookie for the child, but it would also avoid the consequence of a nasty burn. So frustration tolerance, it also enables individuals to build their confidence. So when they attempt to solve problems, the initial efforts may fail. And this can be frustrating, but without frustration tolerance, people just give up. As a result, they do not put forth any effort. And, clearly, if we don't make any effort to solve our problems, we can't develop any skills that we need to solve them. It is important to add that frustration tolerance is really important because people just respond to frustration in different ways. So some people, they may respond in an impulsive, stubborn, or aggressive manner. Others respond with passivity, withdrawal, and compliance. And poor frustration tolerance can potentially may cause aggression towards caregivers, and it may also lead to self-injurious behaviors. So these behaviors are often observed in some people with an intellectual disability. So effects of impulse control disorder. Impulse control disorders can significantly impair individuals' life on a daily basis, and when left untreated, these daily complications have the ability to develop into serious long-term consequences. Below are some possible negative outcomes that could be experienced should the symptom of an impulse control disorder be left untreated. So we have here having a hard time developing and maintaining healthy interpersonal relationships, participating in self-harming behaviors, academic failure, inability to meet responsibilities at work, consistently decreasing feelings of self-worth, financial difficulties, consistent hospitalization, legal interaction, including incarceration, and suspension or expulsion from school. And here we have a video of a young lady. She's just describing her experience as an adult with impulsivity.
I think after 6 years of doing this channel, I've really worked on coping skills for my ADHD, and I've really gotten it under control. It has recently been brought to my attention that I am still incredibly impulsive. And I realized I didn't actually maybe work on that quite as much as I did the other things.
This episode is sponsored by Sunsama. Stick around till the end of the video to learn more about it.
So I'm impulsive, and I knew this about myself. I come up with ideas and I launch right into them. I take on new projects all of the time. It made me great at starting new projects and new ideas and starting a company. I started this YouTube channel because of an impulsive idea. Looking back at some of the things that have really gotten in my way in my life, they've not as much been about the inattention and the difficulties with productivity as they have been about my impulsivity. And it's something I've been reflecting on a lot lately and really coming to terms with. that a lot of the times it was impulsively getting into a relationship that turned out to not be good for me, or impulsively making a purchase that I couldn't really afford. Those are the things that like really were getting in my way. It can be a hard thing to realize that something that like I really like about myself is also something that is getting in my way, and not just hurting me. Like if I don't get my work done, that hurts me, but hurts other people. If I make an impulsive decision that affects somebody else, or I say something impulsively to somebody else, like that doesn't just affect me, that can affect the other person too. I think when I get distracted, I have time to think about it. Like, oh, okay, I got distracted. Like, what can I do to help me focus? Or when I'm not feeling motivated, like, cool, like what strategies can I put in place to like help with my motivation? With impulsivity, it gets trickier because like it almost, to think about what you're going to say before you say it requires that we have a pause to begin with, that we have enough time to think about what we're going to say. And with impulsivity, you almost don't. There's very little, if any, pause at all between when I think a thought and when it's coming out of my mouth. And I talked to Caroline McGuire, the author of Why Will No One Play With Me, about this. And she said that's true for ADHDers. Like she's so tired of hearing people talk about like, oh, well, just pause and think about what you're going to say, because for ADHDers, there is no pause. Like we don't get that pause. And so that doesn't mean that we can just use that as an excuse and go around like saying whatever we want and doing whatever we want and being like, oh, like I have ADHD, I'm impulsive, like sorry, or like deal with it. But it does mean we have to get a little more creative about solutions and not expect ourselves to do something that like is not within our ability. If we have really terrible breaks, like we can't count on those breaks. And so we have to figure out other ways to slow ourselves down. And that's what I'm learning. There's a lot of advice that like might make sense for somebody who doesn't have ADHD, who isn't impulsive, that doesn't make sense for us. One of those is never text during an argument, because like then there's more chances for miscommunication and stuff like that. I am personally less worried about miscommunication at this point than I am about putting my foot in my mouth and saying something that I don't mean. Using text for me can be really helpful because usually the person that I'm having an argument with, like I understand them really well. Like I generally know where they're coming from. And so the best thing I can do for myself is to slow myself down by texting and giving myself a chance to read what I'm writing before I send it, so that I have that pause, so that I have that choice. Because a lot of the time it doesn't feel like I have a choice. It feels like that choice is taken away. And I've leaned into it, I've embraced it as like a big part of me, but the truth is there are times when I do want a choice. Like I want to be able to decide how I want to respond to somebody. I want to feel good about how I handled a confrontation or a difficult situation. I want to feel good about the decisions that I make. And if I don't have that pause and I don't have that choice, it's really hard to do that. And so I'm working on building in ways to slow myself down a little bit so that I give myself back that choice. And then I'm not just at the mercy of like whatever my brain impulsively decides to do. It is not an easy thing to do. And like, it doesn't always work. I might still text something that like, I probably shouldn't have texted if I'm really emotional. I might still make a decision to change things without really thinking them through, but like, it at least gives me a little bit of that, I guess, control back over my own brain and my own instincts to be able to slow myself down and to put in guardrails, because there are some times where like maybe I do make a decision in a situation, but then maybe like before I act on it, like I can go talk to somebody else. Maybe I'm convinced this is what's great and we're going to go do it, but like I just run it by somebody because I know that I'm impulsive. I know that like I'm not going to necessarily take the time to think everything through, and maybe they can help and be like, okay, cool. Like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And like, maybe sometimes yes, because I can go really quickly, but sometimes maybe there is something that I missed and they can help me identify that. If impulsivity is like this double-edged coin, right? Where like, sometimes it lands in the positive and like, oh man, like it's really great that I took that risk and I did that chance. And then like on the negative, it's like, yeah, I got into a car accident because that was a real bad idea to, you know, to go for a midnight drive. I want it to land on the positive a little bit more than it lands on the negative. And I want to have that choice. I want to slow myself down enough that I have a choice. And then in the areas where my impulsivity is great and helpful and fun, like cool, nothing needed to touch there. Or maybe I even encourage it, right? If I know that I respond really strongly to visual cues and I impulsively do whatever the visual cue says to do, maybe I make sure that I put visual cues of like healthy stuff in my line of sight. Like I put a bowl of apples on the table or put my water bottle where I'm going to see it first thing in the morning. And like I take advantage of that. I don't know if I'll ever be able to give myself that pause, but at least set myself up for success. And maybe if I can't slow myself down in a situation, maybe it's like figuring out ahead of time, like if this happens, what am I gonna do? If I'm going into a situation where I know that like somebody annoys me because they always talk about this one thing, like maybe decide ahead of time, if they talk about this thing, like what am I gonna do? Am I gonna go take a walk? Am I gonna change the conversation? Like kind of cue that up in advance so that when I do impulsively do something, I have made a choice. Because if I can't make the choice in the moment, I can make it for myself ahead of time. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's what it's about. Like, it's about finding ways to set ourselves up for success so that we're making a choice ahead of time or slowing ourselves down enough in the moment that we can make a decision that we feel good about and we can respond in a way that is up to us and not our impulsivity. When I think about it, the times that I lost my job, those were me being impulsive. It was something that I said or did impulsively that I shouldn't have said or done. And I wanted those jobs. It's okay now that I don't have them anymore, but like in those situations, my impulsivity took away my choice. It wasn't up to me whether or not to keep that job because like I didn't even make the decision to say the thing that I said. It just came out of my mouth. And I want choice. Choice is a good thing. For me, one of the big things that I'm trying to do is recognize the times where my impulsivity is likely to be the most extreme and I'm likely to make decisions that I don't really feel good about. And that tends to be when I have really big emotions, whether I'm really scared or I'm really angry or I'm really happy and excited, enthusiastic. Like those tend to be the times where I will impulsively do or say something that I might regret later. And so that to me is now a cue. If I'm having big emotions, slow down. It does not always work, but it definitely works better than the pause. Like I might not be able to stop doing the thing or like pause before I do the thing, but like if I do it slower, that can often help a lot. But if I feel it in my body that I'm having big emotions, that is often a cue to me to slow down. Again, does not always work. Sometimes I need the guardrails. Sometimes I need the external supports, but I'm slowly figuring it out.
Speaking of impulsivity and choice, Sunsama is one of the main things that helps me with that. If you haven't heard of Sunsama, it's a system designed to help people mindfully plan their workday and work weeks so they can get their stuff done without burning out. I very often take on too much or try to overplan my day. Sunsama lets me know when I've got an unpredictable or unrealistic workload and encourages me to bump back tasks to the next day. And when I inevitably don't get everything I planned done anyway, because life and distractions happen, the task automatically rolls over to the next day. But won't they just pile up until we end up avoiding the app entirely because we're super overwhelmed? Not necessarily. Sunsama also has a feature called Auto Archive. If you turn it on, it automatically archives tasks that have rolled over for more than a few days, so they don't just keep piling up and getting us overwhelmed. Occasionally, I remember to dip into the archive and scroll through all the tasks I didn't get to, and I realized most of the tasks weren't actually all that important, or at least not as high a priority as the other stuff on my plate. Sometimes though, they actually were very important and just not as urgent. I absolutely don't want to forget about those, so I almost turned Auto Archive off. But Sunsama has this other cool feature where I can have a recurring task, in this case, review the archive, so I can rescue any critical tasks. The more I use Sunsama, the more I realize how thoughtfully it was designed and the better I get at planning my weeks. I don't think I've ever used it perfectly, and honestly, I don't have to for it to help, which is pretty cool. Also, Sunsama is so ADHD friendly, they have a trial period that doesn't require a credit card up front, so you can decide whether or not you want to be charged for it after you've tried it out. If you'd like to give it a try, I highly recommend it. Go to sunsama.com/a/howtoadhd. I hope you love it as much as I do.
Let me know what strategies you use with your impulsivity and what works for you. Thank you to my brain advocates and all my Patreon brains for being with me on this journey. I would not have been able to learn all of the stuff that I get to learn and share it with the world if it weren't for your support. So thank you so much. Like, subscribe, click all the things. That's another place where you can use your impulsivity. I'll see you next video. Bye, brains. I think
Okay. So as far as causes and risk factors for impulse control disorders, As most often with mental health disorders, researchers are usually they're not able to determine the exact cause for the development of an impulse control disorder. But it is believed that many factors, such as biological, physical, and environmental factors, can play a role. So just consider these two factors listed right here when coming to understand the development of impulse control disorders. So first we have genetic. So family members of those with impulse control disorders are at a higher risk for developing one of these disorders themselves. And the second factor is environmental. Environment can greatly impact whether an individual who is predisposed to this condition will go on to develop impulse control problems. So if the individual have grown up in a very highly stressful, chaotic home life or have been victims of abuse or neglect, they're often at a higher risk for developing an impulse control disorder than other individuals who have not shared the same experiences. So right here, the risk factors are listed as the first one being a male. It's more common that males have impulse issues and control problems. Women, of course, do as well, but it's just you're more at risk for just being a male. And pre-existing mental illness, variations in brain chemistry and function, experience with severe head injury, that can cause impulse control disorders, having epilepsy, family history of mental illness, personal or family history of substance abuse or addiction, being younger, and chronic exposure to violence and aggression, which goes back, of course, to the environmental factor piece. Okay. So impulse control disorders are known to occur alongside other various mental health conditions. So it's very common for an individual to meet the diagnostic criteria for another mental illness when they are suffering from impulse control disorders. So these are the following co-occurring disorders. So it's anxiety disorders, conduct disorder, antisocial personality disorder, depressive disorders, oppositional defiant disorder, bipolar disorder, substance use disorders, and post-traumatic stress disorder. So this is impulse control strategies. So the first at the top is rest, of course, a healthy diet, getting enough sleep, and physical exercise. Regular exercise, such as mindful exercises like yoga and stretching, as well as intense vascular exercise, um, can help people with impulse issues become more resilient to stress. Also mindfulness, of course, and being aware of yourself and the world around you allows a person to focus on awareness as opposed to emotions. Mindfulness is a really good strategy to improve impulse control by allowing us to control a handle of our emotions as they're happening. Other strategies, of course, you could connect with a therapist who is familiar with these type of disorders. You can consider joining a support group. You could explore healthy behaviors that can replace impulsive ones, like journaling, meal planning. If you're one of those impulsive eaters or like to spend a lot of money on food, setting a budget for impulsive spending, or going for a walk. Also, identify things that happen before engaging in risky and impulsive behaviors to learn how to stop them in the future. And here's another video. It's a little old, but it's another video overcoming impulsiveness and he shares a few of his own strategies and techniques as well that he works with others.
If you've ever been called flaky, unpredictable, or moody, you can beat your impulsiveness. Dr. Bill Baker, who's a licensed marriage and family therapist, joins me now. Thank you so much for taking on this topic.
Glad to be back.
You know, we're all impulsive from time to time. Why is it such a problem, though?
You're exactly right, Linda. We all battle with impulsiveness to some degree. That is, we say things, we do things without really thinking about the results or the consequences. But it becomes a major problem when it becomes a lifestyle. And people go through life essentially, shall we say, leaping before they look. They do not consider consequences, and as a result, things like personal health becomes at risk, relationships are at risk, employment, job settings, all these things become involved.
Help people identify whether they are impulsive. It's their lifestyle to be impulsive.
Well, primarily it would be the frequency and the, I guess, the intensity, how many mistakes we make, what kind of messes they generate, and how much misery we have as a result of the mistakes that we make through impulsive behavior.
There's good news that we can overcome impulsiveness. Is that right?
Yes. Now, it's easier said than done. The big solution, I think, is improved self-control. If we have good self-control, impulsiveness usually is no major problem. That's the big solution. The more immediate goal is simply to think consequences. Think about the results of my words or actions before I say them or do them.
Now, are there any tools or techniques? I know that you've brought some things with you to kind of point it out.
Well, when I'm working with kids, children, teenagers, and a lot of adults in my therapy practice, I have about 10 different techniques or tools I like to use. I brought 2 or 3. One thing is to put reminders up to remind us to think consequences.
Excuse me.
These are little price tags, and I like to give these out to people with the letters TC, which means to think consequences. I've had people hang them from the rearview mirror in the car or in the bathroom at home. Just remind them to think consequences. There is a cost or a price to impulsive behavior. So the price tags would be one thing. I like to use play to teach children and adults even to slow down and think. With younger children, elementary, I like to use pickup sticks. I'll get them on the floor and spread them around, and before the kids start picking up things, put your hands behind you, get the big picture, try to think it through, and do not touch something before you need to. So think about consequences. For older teenagers and adults, games like chess, where you have to strategize and think ahead. If I move here, this will happen, that will happen. And even a lot of video games are helpful. I like to use timers. For example, if we want to learn self-control, suppose I want a Snickers bar. I want it real badly. But I tell myself, okay, wait 10 minutes, and then you can have it if you still want it. I set a timer, and so I put off, I delay getting that particular thing, and I learn self-control.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to, we're going to have to leave it right there. I think those are great tools and techniques in order to find self-control in our daily lives. Bill Baker, thank you so much for being here
glad to be
and
here.
sharing with us. And you got to come back, and let's pick up on that topic.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
And here's also another video of some techniques that she had mentioned.
So there are some serious impulsive behaviors. Let's take a look at what they include. Some things as eating disorders or alcohol or drug abuse, deliberate self-harm, which we're seeing increase in teenagers more now than ever, and suicide as well. So obviously, these are all serious, suicide being the most serious of them all. How do you, if you focus on your self-awareness and your self-control, can you kind of not get to that point where you get to the danger zone, I would call it?
Definitely. It's having that self-awareness, being able to redirect the impulses which are not favorable. that are not advantageous to you. And as you have that self-awareness, having tools and techniques to be able to wedge the behavior. So it's all about being in the here and now, the mindfulness, being totally present, having the ability to say, whoa, that's not where I'm at. I'm here, I'm safe. We do grounding techniques. I have a gentleman right now that he puts his foot on the floor and he does a grounding technique, and he identifies 4 or 5 things in the room, and it brings him back to here and now.
And is that a good method for everyone, or is that just for him?
For him, it works.
Okay.
We have to see what works. Number one is what a person is willing to take action on.
Okay.
Because we have many techniques, and no, I didn't do that one, or that one doesn't appeal to me. So it's what they're willing to take action
What's it
with.
doing if I'm sitting here and I say, you know, a clock, a teleprompter, a monitor, and a camera? Is that just bringing me to, like, let's focus on what's around, and what does that do? It's just...
I cannot focus on what is present and what is past at the same time.
Okay.
Wherever my energy flows,
Okay.
that's where where it's going to expand.
Okay.
So if I say I am here and I'm speaking to Cynthia and she has a beautiful necklace on, then it brings me back to here.
Okay. Okay, I get that.
And
that
so
makes a lot of
if you
sense.
identify at least 4 things in your surrounding, it helps you to come back to the here and the now.
Okay.
And then being grounded, like having the foot on the floor.
Literally.
And saying yes.
Okay, so we're at the review. So this is the end of the presentation. But I don't know if you remember the questions from the beginning, but here they are, and we're just gonna go over the answers. Okay, so what is impulse control disorder? A disorder characterized by urges and behaviors that are excessive and or harmful to oneself or others. True or false? Impulsiveness in people with intellectual disability or ID is lower than typically developing people. So that is false. So just remember that intellectual disability, people with intellectual disabilities, impulsiveness is higher than other developing people. What are the 2 factors that play a role in causing a development of an impulse control disorder? Genetics and environmental factors. True or false? Chronic exposure to violence and aggression is a common risk factor for developing an impulse control disorder. True. And another true or false. So true or false, post-traumatic stress disorder commonly co-occur with impulse control disorder. True again. And lastly, what is trichotillomania? Repetitive hair pulling causing noticeable hair loss.